The new 14.5 TFT patch brought a huge change to items ranging from reworks to completely brand new items and artifacts. On top of that, they had their usual rounds of nerfs and buffs. It's still one of the most balanced patches we've seen in recent times, but it can be really confusing with all the new changes. So let's go ahead and dive into the TFT Academy tier list, find out what comps are on top, how do we approach the new items, and what's ultimately the best things to play. Here's a brief summary of what to know about all the new items. The first is that Guardbreaker is now called Striker's Flail. Before, Guardbreaker was a 10 out of 10 item with Jewel Gauntlet, and it was only like a 7 or 8 out of 10 with Infinity Edge. But now it's a 10 out of 10. It's because now critical strikes get more damage amp, which is more consistent for physical damage dealers because they attack a lot. The second is that Rageblade now just gets stacking attack speed per second without having to attack. So users that really like Spear of Shojin now can actually play Rageblade as a secondary option. Units like Xayah and Annie, who might play a Shojin, can actually use Rageblade without having to worry about how much they attack. The third is that New Spirit Visage is not very good. It's basically a weak version of the artifact Anima Visage, which they're now removing because they felt like Redemption was too powerful of a support item. Spirit Visage is now a tier and a belt. I would recommend against building it in a lot of situations unless you don't really have anything else you can build. Because tier and belt are premium items and you don't want to be using it for mediocre stuff like this. They're probably going to have to buff this item later on. It's still playable and anybody that really liked Anima Visage, like Dr. Mundo, Zach, and Cho'Gath. But there are not that many people that actually really like it, so for now, I would stay away from it and try to build better items instead. Next is Kraken's Fury. This item is awesome. It's really good for anybody that already likes Rageblade. Aphelios, Zeri, Vayne, Kog'Maw, all these units really like Kraken's Fury because the more attack speed you get, the more you're able to get stacking attack damage. Think of it like Archangels, but for physical damage. So the longer the fight goes, the more AD you're going to get. It's also not even bad on other 4 costs that don't really want to play Rageblade. You can put it on Xayah, you can put it on Misfortune because they ultimately don't mind getting more AD. Next, Void Staff has replaced Static Shiv, and this is basically the AP version of Last Whisper. In the past, you didn't really want to put Static Shiv on your primary carry because Static Shiv was something to shred the whole team, but didn't give that much stats. But now Void Staff gives you a pretty good amount of stats, so just put it onto your primary carry, like if you're playing Brand, Ziggs, or Annie. And finally, Stairs Gauge. Oh my god, they gave this way too many stats. They doubled the amount of health, and they went from 15 to 40 AD. This is an insane amount of overloaded stats. You should just be building Stairs Gauge a lot if you're playing anything remotely AD. This item is so overstated that it's actually totally fine to just put this not just on melee units, but even some backline units. And you can keep it there if you want to, or move it off in the late game, depending on what your item economy looks like. But putting it on Vi or Kog'Maw is completely viable as long as you combine it with other items. Graves is a really good melee holder. You can put it on Rengar and ladder it all the way up to the 5 cost. Or I've seen people put Stairs Gauge just on Misfortune, Xayah, Aphelios, and just play the usual backline carry. It's kind of like a halfway bridge between Deathblade and sort of like an Edge of Night to keep them safe against a lot of burst. So play more Stairs Gauge. That item is freaking awesome. I can't believe they shipped it with that much stats. They're definitely going to have to nerf it. In terms of artifacts, all of them are pretty bad except for Flicker Blade. This one is basically like the old Rageblade, but they juiced it and it gives you scaling stats. And the reason why this is really powerful is because it turns a lot of units into a hyper carry. It's like if they had a buff Rageblade combined with a buff Kraken's Fury and fused into one item. And so Flicker Blade ends up being single-handedly enabling a lot of compositions. As we continue to update the tier list, you can always click things like Flicker Blade and search who are the carries that are really good with this item in particular. It's very, very strong. We also have a list under things like alternative builds for Zeri and things like Exotech because it's also really powerful there. And just as a reminder for anybody that's supporting us on Patreon, make sure you click the Meta Read newsletter where every patch we drop like a 2,000 word essay or so about the patch. And this one we go through all the different items, how to play them, as well as all different stuff about like the tech that we have for the patch. At the very top of the tier list, we have Misfortune Dynamo Flex. This is the best comp in the game statistically, and it is performing very, very well in high elo lobbies, mainly because it's super flexible, and all you really need is at least 2 plus some frontline, and then throw whatever leftover AD on Misfortune. At least best in slot is blue buff and AP, but realistically, you can justify slamming a bunch of different stuff. I've seen people slam like Shojin, Giant Slayer, Guardbreaker, and then just like figure it out later on, because eventually maybe the guard breaker pairs with Jewel Gauntlet and then you get blue buff later on. Then like the Shojin Giant Slayer goes into Misfortune. Or you go like red buff / Morello and then JG and then like a Void Staff and then eventually move those items off onto Aurora and get like that blue buff or Shojin later on. You can even play things like Adaptive on Elise as well. Very, very flexible. The whole point is that you're trying to play a very cheap board of like Morgana, Elise, and then usually you play like a Syndicate frontline for Misfortune, Darius, Braum, Ross, Gragas with the Divinicorp Vanguards. Very cheap frontline. You should be able to actually get to level 9 and be very competitive. You can actually beat a lot of 4-cost boards that don't have full upgrades on stage 4. And so because your board is really cheap, you get to level 9, then you can just start replacing those 3-cost and 2-cost frontliners with 5-cost, and that's how you cap out and win the game. So if you get to Zach and you can put items on him with blobs, he's a really good replacement for the Braum and the Ross and whatever else you're putting as your frontline. You can also play other variations too. You can play 4 Vanguard, like Leona plus Silas is Anima squad with Aurora, and you can play 4 Vanguard that way. You could also play Bruisers if you hit Cho'Gath 2 and then Kabuko, then play Gragas, throw in another 4th Bruiser. This Poppy here is also optional. It's just a nice Bastion that ties with the Vernectin, but it's just like a cheaper way to build your board, because otherwise if you put Sejuani here, it's just so expensive of a board. So we wanted to just provide some alternatives. But realistically, the front line is super duper flexible. Just play around whatever you hit, try to get to 9 and be very, very efficient with it. Couple of power augments in particular that I really like. Memory Bank is super good. One tip about Memory Bank is that it actually counts, I believe, the creep rounds. You can play multiple copies of the same unit. So let's say on the end of stage 2, you could play Poppy 2 and then play Elise, Morgana, and another Morgana. And all 3 of them should count towards the Memory Bank. Just a small little tip there. Another is that I really like Bronze for Life for this comp in particular. You can splash in a bunch of different traits. My favorite is actually play around Nitro for Elise, because Nitro has so many triple trait units like Shyvana and Kindred. And you probably drop Morgana in that instance to play Jhin, since Jhin is like a Dynamo Marksman. And then you also can tie in some Exotech stuff, like maybe you play around Mordekaiser, or maybe you play Jax and Naafiri. So you have a lot of different ways that you can kind of get the Bronze for Life and get a ton of different damage amp for your whole team. The nice thing, too, about this composition that you pretty much can't low roll items, right? If you get a bunch of swords and gloves, that goes in Misfortune. Tears and rods go on Elise. Leftover utility on Aurora. And, of course, all the front line can just go, like Bramble, Declaw can just go on any front line. So very versatile. You can use a ton of different augments. Great for tempo. You can also reroll, right? If you get stuck on level 8, you can just play for Elise 3 and, Braum 3 and just reroll for that. This version is basically what you play if you are low rolling and you need to like stay on level 8 to roll for a 3-star. So this is basically the same thing that we just talked about. And also pretty solid with a Dynamo Emblem. You can put always Dynamo Emblem onto another carry or even put it as a front line. The other S tier composition currently in the game is Strategist AMP. This composition caught on a lot towards the end of last patch, where many people were just one-tricking this comp from Master straight to Challenger. You generally open for it in Blue Streak because you kind of need specific items. You need a lot of tiers to make this composition work. So a lot of people usually open for it for blue buff, and you'll just take every tier you can get. One of the item changes that's pretty good for this composition is Void Staff. Annie really likes Void Staff in particular. It gives her the early mana to cast faster, and her ability has really good synergy with it. But you can also just go back to making blue buff Shojin and Nashers, the standard build that a lot of people are playing. If you have Mana Zane, it's really, really good on Annie in particular. So when you're rolling on 8, you can be very stable with just Annie too. Yuumi 3 is really good in this composition, and blue buff is actually still very good on Yuumi as well. But because of her passive, the amp scales how much mana she gains per second. So you can actually get away with not having that blue buff on her. You can go Deathcap, Jewel Gauntlet, and Gunblade, for example, or Guard Breaker, and it also works really fine. This is just like a high roll scenario of like what you would itemize if you were to choose. But you could definitely move this blue buff off Yuumi. If you could choose, put on Annie or Yuumi, put on Annie, and then put AP items on Yuumi. Samira takes over leftover items. The ideal tank is Zac. Usually you lose streak and rack a bunch of econ, take all these econ augments, and then find an early Zac and roll with it in to get a bunch of blobs. That's usually hard to pull off, so what is a more common situation is that you put items onto Nico too instead, and then eventually you get to Zac, maybe leveling play Kabuko, and then you're playing like a bunch of different 5-cost there in the end game state. Anybody who plays this composition will tell you, you roll for the board, you hit Yuumi, you hit Annie, you might even get Samira, but then you only have items for like 3 items on Yuumi, 1 on Samira, 1 on Annie. That's actually fairly common, especially when you need to win out. So definitely take item augments if you possibly can. Things like 1 buff, 2 buff, blue battery, replication, they get multiple tiers. Just anything that helps you get a bunch of components is very, very valuable for this comp. I will say that as much as people like to lose streak with this, I personally believe the best version of this composition tends to play from ahead if you have the item fixing already. So if you have something like Pandora's, or maybe you have some way to play high tempo around blue buff and win streak because you're guaranteed your items, I would say that you don't have to lose streak with this. The really common mistake that I see a lot of people do, they just sell everything anyways and just hope that they can hit on 8. If you can just play a nice steady tempo strategy, it's also really good. And the best part about playing from high tempo is that if you have something like blue buff and gunblade already slammed, you can also play some other compositions. Like you can go into Vex, for example, and Vex also plays exactly those items. If you play from lose streak, you basically have to roll very committal and all in to hit the best possible board. But if you're win streaking and you find yourself, contested, you have actual pivot options if you just build a bunch of these AP items. And that's the strength of being able to play AP from ahead. Anima Squad remains pretty powerful, largely because it's just one of the compositions that doesn't really mind low rolling the number of items. Right now, one of the big ways that you can just lose is just not having any items for your composition. And Anima Squad gets a lot done with very little because the weapon damage just does so much for your composition. So Anima Squad still top 3 in my book. Very, very good. The thing about Anima Squad, though, is that you sort of need something that triggers the combat power of the comp. You really want something like Support Spire, Little Buddies, Quality over Quantity. These are all like really good green flags that signal Anima Squad, because the longer units are able to stay alive, the more damage your weapon's going to do. Aurora also got buffed, so she's even better now. Aurora does a ton of damage. If you can get her 2-star, she can absolutely close games out. And things like the Void Staff that's recently changed are really good on her in particular. Both Void Staff and the Jewel Gauntlet Guard Breaker stuff is fantastic on her. But it's a pretty basic 7-piece vertical, nothing too crazy. Don't overvalue Anima Squad +1. It is nice, so that way you can drop things like Yumi and Vayne that don't really do much, but you don't really have to prioritize that. Unless you're going for 10 Anima, then it's very much worth it. Things that give you 3 stars over time, like let's say you get Caretaker's Ally into Alawi, or you get Worth the Wait into Silas, those are actually very good for the composition because the 3-star increases the weapon power. So if you're able to get like a 3-star Silas for free, heavily consider playing some Anima Squad and then maybe put some leftover items onto Silas after you itemize everybody else. If you want more information on how to play Anima Squad, check out this guide section on TFT Academy. It's free for everyone to do. Just click guides, the Anima Squad guide, and we show you things like level progression, how to really get to your board, how to play around early game, some fundamental tips about how to actually approach all phases of the game. And honestly, this is one of my most solid guides that I think I've ever made for the website to kind of teach you a lot of core things about the game. So definitely check this out if you're interested in learning more. Marksman Vanguard is still very straightforward, and it hasn't changed that much this patch, but it seems pretty solid. They did nerf Leona, so it's a little bit trickier to stabilize versus if you are playing a Anima Squad, you still get some defensive traits. Leona loses a little bit of that while playing 4 Vanguard. But the good news is that Kraken's Fury is a really good item for some of these Rageblade holders, and Aphelios is one of those users. So instead of going for double Rageblade, you can go for Kraken's Fury, and that actually is really nice because it is better for your item economy. You don't have to go for 2 rods, 2 bows. You can just slam that cloak item, Kraken's Fury, Rageblade, and win streak that way. The main thing about this composition that I think people have figured out is that you actually want to prioritize Xayah. Aphelios is the janitor. Xayah actually wants to deal all the damage, and Aphelios cleans up. And so what ends up happening for most smooth games is that, yes, you might make something like Rageblade, but then you kind of stop making Aphelios items entirely, and you go like Infinity Edge, Last Whisper, Guardbreaker, and try to make Xayah items. Xayah also, by the way, is not that bad with Rageblade as much because she ends up getting the Rageblade stacks without having to attack a lot. So it ends up being an okay item on her. So you can definitely go like Rageblade, i.e. Guardbreaker on Xayah, and then eventually you hit Aphelios, move the Rageblade over to Aphelios, and then finish Xayah's items like, somewhere in stage 5. So don't be afraid to power stack whoever you're 2-starring. If you 2-star Aphelios, that's great, but I prefer to lean into Xayah. If I hit Xayah too quickly, I'm feeling really, really good, and I just give leftover to Aphelios. Like, I'm really serious, man. I've seen people play like not 1 but 2 Gnash's Tooth on Aphelios. Like, their build was Nasher Gunblade on Aphelios, and they were still crushing things because they didn't care about their items necessarily as much as they cared about just maintaining their momentum and tempo. And just for emphasis, one more time, Marksman Emblem is very OP on Misfortune. If you can find a way to get items on Misfortune, you'll be good to go. Zed is a lot better this patch, mainly because Sterix Gauge is really strong of an item. They just gave this item way too much stats, as we talked about at the beginning of the video. And so it just ends up being like the way you slam melee items and you play into him. And the thing about Zed is that he actually can pair with all different kinds of backlines. You could play Zed with Slayers. You can play Zed in Divinicorp. You can also play Zed with other backline carries like Misfortune, which sounds kind of weird, but if you just like put the Syndicate there with Senna, you'll realize it all kind of ties in. But the whole point is you slam Sterix Gauge, you slam melee items, you tempo, and then eventually you get to Zed, and then you get to 9 to play the 5 costs. If you end up getting to that spot, you can top 4 very easily, and it ends up looking really good. The only problem with this composition is that Z1 might be the worst 4 cost in the game. If you are stuck on just a 1-star version of Zed, he's just not going to kill anything. And if your entire game plan is roll on 8, miss Z2, and you're stuck on Z1, and even if you have like Senna 2 and some other good support units, you're just not going to win any fights. And so it becomes really, really important that you think that 1, Zed's not contested, and 2, you have the econ to actually hit the Zed. The best version that we're showing is Divinicorp. So if you get the top end going with, Renekton and Divinicorp with Garen, you can even win the game. But most oftentimes, you're just going to probably play some kind of Slayer variation, like 4 Slayer, 4 Vanguard, or maybe just going for Zed plus any kind of 4 cost that you hit. You can also play Cypher into Zed as well, which is, I guess, like some of the variations that we have here. Like instead of going for Draven 3, you can just like cash out, play Cypher, and look for Zed. You can also even play the 5 Cypher Zed variations as well, which is also really good, which you can also play LeBlanc carry. So you have a lot of different options here with Zed, depending on whether or not you do get Cypher in or you are just playing from ahead with tempo. I would say that the one item that I'm willing to replace in this setup is actually Bloodthirster. I feel like Infinity Edge and Sterix Gauge is just such a powerful item on him that you could justify a bunch of different healing things. Like you can go Hand of Justice, you can go Edge of Night, you can go Quicksilver, you can even go Gunblade, Hextech Gunblade. But I just feel like without Infinity Edge, that's not going to deal enough damage. And then Sterix Gauge just gives him so much flat stats that he wants with survivability that you'll be good to go. And if you activate Slayer, you get some healing through that. So it's not like Zed doesn't have any healing whatsoever. Bastion Morgana reroll. This is actually a composition that is really popular and completely dominated the second half of the previous patch because people found out that they overbuff Morgana's damage and they buff Poppy enough and they buff 6 Bastion. It became unkillable. And perhaps most importantly, they figured out Bastion emblem on the Morgana was pretty OP because it converts the percentage of their resistances to AP damage. And so you would put the Bastion onto Morgana and it'd be worth like a death cap, except that she would also be very tanky. It was a very, very nasty combo. And so Bastion Morgana was very, very strong and still currently is. They nerfed it, so it's not nearly as oppressive, but it's still very good if you get all the setup for it. I would say that the big limiting factor of Morgana is just getting the right items. It's kind of hard to play Morgana reroll if you're in a low item situation, so try to make sure to take item fixing augments if you can, or if you have a component anvil star or just like a lot of items from hacks, so that way you can get Morgana and Poppy itemized ASAP. Also, some combat augments worth thinking about. Really love preparation for Morgana. Just gives you a ton of stats and you're able to snowball your leads. And if you're able to get fully prep Morgana 2, Poppy 2, even by stage 3, you should also win on everything on that stage. Investment strategy and no scout, no pivot are also really good combat scaling augments. So be on the lookout for that. And of course, if you get good econ augments, shop glitch, Starry Night, prismatic ticket, things like that are always also solid for some of these compositions that want to roll for multiple 3 stars. Just keep in mind that Starry Night odds are not always super favorable. I know there's some people that don't like Starry Night for 1 cost and they prefer for 2 costs that play a couple 1 costs, like Nitro, for example. But you can still definitely take it if the situation calls for it. The other thing about this composition is positioning. You really want to position Poppy specifically in these 3rd hexes, either A3 or A5. She'll be able to reach the 3rd and the 7th hexes on the enemy side. And it's also true of the 3rd hex too. She can reach the top left, and you want Morgana over here where Lisa's. If you position Poppy here in the center, she's going to hit instead 1 off from the corner. She's going to hit 6 and 2 instead, which is Not going to be where a lot of carries tend to be. So just essentially make sure that Morgana and Poppy are on the correct side of your enemy carry so that way you get the positioning edge. One of the other big conditions is Blooding Jewel Morgana as well. Very, very strong artifact combo, and it's quite broken once you get everything online and rolling. Nitro is still really, really strong, and if you're able to snowball it early by getting an early 3-star of any kind, 3-star Nidalee, 3-star Kindred, or perhaps even 3-star Shyvana, you can start stacking this T-Hex really high up, and if you can get to like 300s, 400s from 3-starring stuff, you can actually win the game. You're only supposed to play this though if you have like Mega Econ, you're on an Econ portal early, you have Pandora's Bench. Maybe you are in one of those portals that give you 2 augments in stage 2 and you're hitting like Shop Glitch and Starry Night or something like that. But if you can get to the 3-star Nitro, it's really powerful. And the core can play a bunch of different carries. Dynamo is the best backline package just in the game in terms of versatility. So, Nitro is just the one that we're featuring. You can play Nitro Zeri if you find a good Zeri spot and play some of the new items like Kraken. And another piece of tech is Dynamo Nitro Vagar is actually really good. If you find Dynamo Emblem on Vagar with the blue buff, it's really good stuff. So this is very, very flexible core. So I wanted to give a shout out. But part of what makes it tough is that it's basically like just another frontline package for a lot of existing comps. Like if you're playing Annie Amp, this is just like one way you can play around Amp. If you're playing around Nitro, if you're playing on Dynamo, this is like what you can play instead of the 5 costs. So that's kind of what makes Nitro really strong, is that you can lean into it just to push to level 8 and then sell it. Or you can reroll and then slowly piece into other backline and kind of reverse a little bit of your game plan. Dr. Mundo Reroll, aka Gorilla, is also a composition that became pretty popular through the last patch. If you actually look at our meta read from last patch, 14.4 for our Patreon exclusive subscribers, we actually predicted that this composition was going to do well because it was starting to get really popular as people were refining it, and we figured out how to really optimize it. And now it's a composition that's regularly seen at high elo because we figured out that the most important thing for this comp is items. Items. You cannot play this composition unless you can find a way to get to 3-item Dr. Mundo pretty quickly. So if you have an opportunity to start off things with like replication, force your items through Pandora's, pick up things like Portable Forge, or just, get something like Belt Overflow to get a giant flux of frontline. It's super crucial that you finish your items on stage 3 so that you can win stage 3 and turn the tides. Mundo is the only true important 3-star, but a lot of times you roll for Mundo 3, Zyra, and Seraphine. Alistar is luxury. It's nice to have him, but he's not super important. If you were to skip one of them, I would probably deprioritize Alistar. But the real trick to convert this into late game is that Brand is the actual carry in the late stages of the game. You play Zyra until you can get to Brand 2. Once you get Brand 2, you move items off of Zyra or Seraphine, whoever your 3-star carry holding items is, and then you put it on Brand. Seraphine's really good at applying utility. Like, she's really good at Void Staff and Red Buff applications, so usually you put those items onto her. The way you cap the board is usually through 6 Techie. You're not actually going for Bruisers. It's because Techie got buffed, and also because Techie units are just better. To play more Bruisers requires you to play like Cho'Gath and like a Darius or something, a Gragas. Not particularly super impressive. If you do find a Bruiser emblem, you might be able to justify 6 Bruisers, but I still think 6 Techie is better. It's also really good with scaling augments as well. If you get things like investment strategy, no scout, no pivot, anything that helps you get more combat stats as the game go on, also really good for this. But I will say this composition is really easy to lose control tempo and go bot 4, so just be really careful about committing to this if you don't have a good likelihood of getting the items and hitting quickly. Let's start off beats here by talking about Vex. Vex is basically the same as before. She did get nerfed technically, but it does feel like she has trouble keeping up with the other compositions in the late stage of the game, and is now transitioned to being a safe top 4 oriented comp that doesn't really like win out nearly as much anymore. Not only that, but you have to have specific items that are good for the composition, not just like Blue Buff and Gunblade, but you also really want to have good Exotech items. So if you're playing Exotech, you really want to have something like Hyperfangs or Coil for Varus, and then preferably the chassis for Mordekaiser. And if you do, you get to play into 5 Exotech, but if you don't have any of those items, you end up just replacing some of the other units like Jax with Renekton, and then Jhin with Viego if you can in the late stage of the game. So it still can do pretty well. It's just that it's hard to get to level 9. You have to roll a lot on level 8, and the composition is not only just dependent on Vex, but also on having good Varus items. I will say that Varus has become more and more impressive in this composition, Not only is he good with some of these items that we talked about, like the new Void Staff and Hyperfangs, but he's also really good with Dynamo. And so if you get a Dynamo emblem, it's actually quite solid in this composition. In fact, the pan could be very versatile in this composition. You could play Dynamo, you can do a Bastion +1, you can use it to transform into an Exotech. You can even do cute things like put Executioner +1 as well if you really need. So this composition is actually pretty versatile with spatulas and pans, but I wouldn't be going out of my way to go for it. The nice thing about Vex is that she is pretty much the true AP flex carry right now. Very similar to how Dynamo can play any frontline, I would say Vex can play any frontline as well. Divinicorp is another way you can play around Vex, and you can flex a mixture of Vanguards and Bruisers for that line. In this case, we have Cho'Gath, for example, but you could justify a bunch of different units of whatever you want to splash in for Divinicorp. You can also just play the straight Bruiser package itself as well, having, Cho'Gath and Kabuko and Mordekaiser help tank for you and kind of hybridize. Instead of playing Bastions, play more Bruisers. And this is very different because if you look at the other AP carries, like Annie, for example, or even Street Demons, which we're going to talk about in a quick second, they have to play their verticals. They have to play things like 7 Street Demon and 5 Amp. So Vex is a composition where the trade-off is you're not going to win a lot, but you'll be very consistent and flexible, and you can pretty much just play a mishmash of different synergies to make it work. Street Demon got better this patch because Zig's a little bit better because they've bug fixed some of the things around him, but overall, it's still pretty much the same comp. Just play 7 Street Demon, try to avoid just playing 5, cap out around Samira and Kabuko, get to your 5 cost, and ultimately play around Bran with big power items. I would say that the item changes really haven't affected much of this composition. I guess Void Staff is a little bit better for something like Ziggs than Shiv is, but for the most part, it's still functionally the same. I did hear that there are still some bugs with Ziggs though, so just be careful. I think he has trouble killing one individual unit, like he doesn't 1v1. So I think that's why the stats might be held back. If they get that bug fix truly in, then maybe this composition is actually good again. But for now, I would say that the composition is sort of a fallback if you have a generic AP line that you're playing from ahead and you're not going to be playing something like AMP. Exotech in general is a little bit better because they buffed the top end of it, but also because Zeri has a nice toy to play with in Kraken's Fury. Kraken's Fury is really good with Rageblade. Just, you get stacking attack speed and stacking AD. Zeri benefits from literally both. Those are like the two things that she wants the most. So, all her echoes are going to scale a lot and ends up being really, really nice synergy. So if you have a flux capacitor or a pulse stabilizer, either on 3 or 5 Exotech, definitely look to try and play some Exotech Zeri and see if you can get her going. The difficulty about it is that Misfortune is really contested now. So it's going to be kind of tricky to get to Misfortune 2 if you see a lot of people playing Dynamo in the lobby. If that does happen, you have a couple of options. The first is you could drop the Syndicate package and play something else. So, for example, you can play around Xayah because she is a marksman, and you can play like Zeri Xayah and then tag in some Anima squad. You could also play a Aphelios and play an Alistar. You get Golden Nox that way, and Golden Nox is a little bit better this patch, so not even terrible. Some of the win conditions still remain true, which is, trait tracker, binary airdrop, all these item augments that enable a lot of Exotech synergy by getting more HP and stats for items. Just generally very, very good. And then also note the positioning. Zeri tends to dash to a location that isn't occupied. So if you have things like Twisted Fate and Jhin in the back line, you're going to crowd Zeri. She summons a clone and then dashes forward, right? She's going to actually move forward for some of the fight, and that ends up putting her in a tough spot. She can get caught by a lot of CC. Units might jump onto her, and so you want to clear that back line. It can be something that punishes you if there's a unit that specifically targets that area, so just keep that in mind. But for the most part, you can't go wrong by putting Zeri on the 3rd row and putting things like Twisted Fate and Jhin or whoever backline one up. Don't do that for your duo carry, though. Misfortune, Xayah, whoever you end up duo carrying should stay in the back row because you don't need to make every space in the back row completely free. The other shout I want to give is Flicker Blade. If you get Flicker Blade, you can even have Zeri solo carry for a while and push to 9 to look for 5 cost because it's just so much stats power loaded into one artifact for Zeri. It's like the perfect Zeri item for her. Imagine if Ginsu's Rageblade and Kraken's Fury literally fusion dance and you have that in one item, and now you can play another item on Zeri to make it even better. So that allows you to get to 9, look for another 5 cost, or maybe just come back from Misfortune later on, and then you can dual carry in the late game. So that's definitely an item to look out for when you're playing this line. Golden Ox. Golden Ox is a lot stronger this patch. By buffing Graves, both the 2 and 3-star versions of him, they've actually given a lot of consistency to the early and mid game of this line. They also buffed Alistar a little bit, so he's more consistent and can scale nicer into the late stages of the game. And just those small little tweaks has given the baseline consistency that Golden Ox needed in order to get to their late game. I'm pretty sure everyone knows by now, Golden Ox has one of the highest caps in the game, period. If you can get to the Golden Ox board, pretty much unstoppable at the very end of the stage of the game. But it's really hard to reach, especially if you don't have a Golden Ox emblem. That's usually one of the big signals to go for it because it allows you to hit 6 Golden Ox before Viego. And the Golden Ox emblem itself is just a ton of damage amp once you start getting it ramping. When you start stacking a lot of damage amp, it gets to the 70s and 80s. That's like basically worth like 2 Giant Slayers, 2 Guard Breakers. So very powerful to put it on whoever you are trio carrying. It is really hard and expensive comp. You're going to have to manage your E-sources and get those damage amp stacks correctly. But if you can get there with this board, it's really insane. You don't have to play around Leona, Xayah, and Aurora. The actual true cap of this board is this, but then Garen mod just a bunch of 5 costs like Kabuko and Zac. If you can get Golden Ox on Zac, Zac actually splits and then kills everything in the back line. So you don't have to worry too much about it. It's just that the Anima package is easy to play. Like Leona's a Vanguard for Jarvan. Xayah is a marksman for Aphelios, and then you also have the amp from Yuumi to connect to Annie until you get to Aurora. Naafiri Reroll is actually less consistent now, and that's usually because there's actually a handful of people playing amp, and it's actually surprisingly hard to hit. So the only time you're really playing Naafiri is if you have the God set up with artifacts, and so that's a little bit rare. And it's super high roll because you kind of need to hit Naafiri and also need to get the 5 amp and also need to have like the artifacts and also need to have like the right amount of items so you can itemize the dual carry. It's just a lot to ask for. So it's really good. It's just one of those once in a blue moon comps, very similar to some of the other conditional rerolls. In fact, we might actually move this to the situational tier at the bottom because Naafiri is just kind of rare to pull off right now. Speaking of Golden Ox, there's a Golden Ox reroll variation that now is starting to gain some popularity. A couple of players are one-tricking it, doing well in ladder and tournament, and it's because Graves got buffed and because Stairs Gauge is a lot stronger of an item. That in tandem with the people experimenting, optimizing the line, have resulted in a 4 Golden Ox Divinicorp setup that people are playing now. You have Vex as the execution that ties in with Graves, and then you kind of like have the rest of Divinicorp piece together synergies. It works pretty well if you can snowball it, but I think it's also a composition that if you're behind, like let's say you have only 1 Graves, you're not winning, you're lose streaking, you're not able to get the Golden Ox stacks, snowballing, it can be a composition that easily gets an uncontested 8th place. The guide that I saw being posted on social media has a lot of people saying, wow, this was the easiest first of my life. And then 3 people saying this comp is terrible. I went 8th place. So I think in the middle B tier, like low B tier is where it belongs because it definitely has moments where it shined, but I do think that's inconsistent. Another thing that we're not entirely sure about, and I have to figure this out before I do a video on it, is are you supposed to roll on level 6 or level 7? Every turn from stage 3 onwards, you can justify activating Golden Ox. But I've seen people roll on 6 for Graves every turn. I've seen people go to 7 and then roll for Graves, Jarvan 3, and then look for some of the other 4 costs. And for the 4 Golden Ox, you can just kind of be flexible. You don't have to play the Viego in this slot. You can play Aphelios or Annie and then kind of piece together the synergies. So all you really need to do is get 4 Golden Ox activated, stack it every single turn, make sure Graves has good items, and then position on the side of the carry that you want to assassinate. Because the way Graves is going to work is going to dash to the target, fire, and then if he kills that tank quickly, there's a chance that he actually gets to the back line and kill the enemy carry as well. Pretty fun comp. Need a lot more experimentation. I'm looking for some VODs of it to try and do a YouTube video on because I think it has a lot of potential. A couple more comps I want to shout out. The first is I think LeBlanc Reroll was a set of buffs that people are not talking about, and a lot of people have the impression that you're only supposed to play LeBlanc if you have like Mana Zane. But now I do think that the LeBlanc buffs are pretty substantial. So if you play a 5 Cypher LeBlanc reroll setup with a mana item, it could be Shojin or blue buff, but Shojin's easier to build. Void Staff and Archangels, like no Mana Zane. The stats on it are really good, even if you're not playing for like a big cash out. So they buff 5 Cypher, they buff LeBlanc, they gave some better items for her. She's a good user of Void Staff, so she can immediately kill tanks as fast as she can. It's just really good synergy there. So I think this is one of the sleeper comps of the patch. Don't sleep on LeBlanc. She's very, very strong if you get the setup for it, especially because with Cypher, anything is possible. Flicker Blade is also an item that I want to highlight. It's like single-handedly making some of these comps still relevant. Flicker Blade is really good with like Rage Blade holders. So Vayne is really good with Flicker Blade. Kog'Maw is also really good with Flicker Blade if you can get to him. And Twisted Fate is also really, really good with Flicker Blade. So if you ever have any of these Flicker Blade artifact starts, consider some kind of reroll composition or just play it later on the 4 cost like a Fearless and Zeri. Very, very powerful item and single-handedly like making some of these comps viable. Taking a look at some of our situational tier stuff, I think the best composition is long-range Shaco, but that's going to be a little bit less consistent. The more consistent and common variation you're going to be playing of Shaco is Artifact Shaco, where you open up something like Portable Forge, Living Forge, and then you commit off of an early Shaco 2 that can snowball off of it. Shaco's been pretty good ever since they buffed him, but what makes him even better this patch is that things like Stairs Gauge and some of those melee starts are more consistent for him now. So you can slam some of those items and really get a ton of value off of like putting it on Shaco, and Shaco can hold a ton of different items. I've played weird Shaco where like I start off with Edge of Night, Sunfire, and Stairs Gauge or something like that, and then eventually move those items off. One thing about Shaco that people miss is that he doesn't actually need Infinity Edge as much, because Infinity Edge helps his ability to crit, but what makes Shaco really strong is that passive AD gain. The fact that he gets AD for each kill he gets just means that his auto attack, him just stabbing things, is going to deal a ton of damage. And so you can just play things that keep him safe, Quicksilver, Edge of Night, plus some kind of artifact, whether it gives him more combat power or helps him teleport, right? Things like Prowler's Claw, Spectral Cutlass, or just Omnivamp. Those are really good things for Shaco. Usually you want to play 6 Slayers. If you do get range extension onto Shaco, try not to give him the King Pit hat so he doesn't teleport. That's a really important distinction. And then also I will say that if you do get double range artifact like Sniper's Focus and Fishbones, that's also really good too. Same thing, don't put the hat on him. Just watch him clock everything and stay safe in the back. Long Crocodile, aka 6 Rapid Fire Renekton, is still actually quite good in the meta. It's just that you need to actually upgrade stuff now. Previously on the 14.4 patch, 6 Rapid Fire was so broken. You could play like a all 1-star board with Renekton 1 and stabilize and actually win a bunch of fights. But now they nerfed it, so you actually have to hit some upgrades. If you are stuck on 1 star, you're going to fall really far behind. But if you hit the whole board, you hit Renekton 2, you're still going to clobber everything and bulldoze the game. So it's still really strong, especially if you get things like Cooking Pot and you're stacking a frontline unit, or you play Cypher and you get it for free with their cash out of some kind, and you're able to play for a Renekton win out. I'm pretty sure this composition is still insane. And the new Stairs Gauge is totally fine to play onto Renekton. I think it's still really good. Rapid Fire plus Stairs Gauge plus Gunblade or Quicksilver, all of it works perfectly fine. And always, as remember, try to avoid things like Rage Blade onto Rapid Fire units because you get a bunch of attack speed. It's even worse in the 6 Rapid Fire build now, so try to avoid building Rage Blade at all costs. Everything else in the situational tier, don't have to talk too much about it in depth. The only ones that I personally like are the Fiddlesticks with the artifact like Blade Jewel, and then the 3 hero augments around these 1 cost like Silas, Poppy, and Vi. I think out of all this, Poppy has the most potential because 6 Bastion's really good, but they did nerf it. I was excited because they buffed Ziggs, but again, I'm not sure if Ziggs is bugged, so your mileage may vary. But I do think the ceiling of this composition is really nice. Adaptive Strike Jax just need too many correct things to go right, and also it's hard to hit if you do have a Morgana reroller. That's also my other problem with Poppy. It feels like it's going to be hard to get if someone's rerolling Morgana. And I think the Ross hero augment is just a little bit weak now, just struggles with super tanks, and I don't think Kayn is very consistent. Plus, he is also contested by people who play like Vanguard Marksman, for example, or some Dynamos. So there you have it, a pretty wide range of available options in the metagame. I think it's a pretty decent patch, and I think that probably not too many more big patches coming. I think this is where Cyber City is going to land, which I think is going to be okay. You know, I wasn't really actually happy with the previous patches, but now I think it's in a better spot. Let me know if you guys have any tech or questions in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.